On the 19th of May, members of the ESO dev team went live on Twitch to chat about the Arcanist. If you missed the stream or simply want a recap, I've got you covered. I may have lost several million brain cells from reading the Twitch chat, but the permanent brain damage was well worth it, as the contents of the stream itself were insightful and interesting, to say the least. I've always been a fan of developer streams that provide in-depth, behind-the-scenes previews or discussions about elements of my favorite games, or games that I'm itching to play when they get released. I'll leave a link to the VOD of this stream in the description if anyone would like to watch it in its entirety. The stream started off with Gina discussing how she had watched a video about a watermelon being deep-fried. She expressed her disappointment that it did not in fact explode upon being fried. This led to her asking the chat what their favorite fried food was.
Yo, who said deep-fried Argonian?
Gina then introduced us to the theme of this stream, one that would focus entirely on the Arcanist and not the other classes. We were introduced to a handful of the developers who all briefly shared their experiences working for ZOS, as well as their roles in designing the new content in Arcanist class. The first topic of discussion dealt with the concept of taking an idea on paper and transforming it into the final product that's seen in-game. Gina prompted the initial discussion by asking the other developers, how do you create a new class? Evidently, all of the different departments must frequently collaborate with one another so that elements such as the sound and visual effects are constantly aligning themselves accordingly with any changes that are made to the class, such as a change to the cast time or casting animation of a skill. The devs stated that initially a bunch of one-pagers were constructed. These are essentially little summaries of ideas for the class. These concepts then get whittled down and adapted to the theme for the year. From there, the developers suggested that they came up with well over 150 prototypes for abilities before refining them. Some ability prototypes were scrapped entirely simply because they were disliked by the team. Others were scrapped because they didn't work within the confines of the game. They would create performance issues, or they just didn't have the tech to implement some of them. In fact, the devs asserted multiple times throughout the stream that they had to develop new tech for the Arcanist to work the way they envisioned. For example, at first, they couldn't get the beams to impact with the terrain, so they had to develop new tech to account for that. Dylan Hairston, the senior sound designer, chimed in to add that they had to work on developing the sound for the Arcanist beam while taking into account multiple gameplay factors. For example, the beams sound differently if they're being cast by you or by someone else. The sound of the beam also fades in or out depending on a player's proximity to the beam. He also stated that he stuck his head in a pumpkin, put a mic in there, made some demonic noises, pitched them down, and processed them a billion times over, and the final products of this tomfoolery are now going to be in the game. Man, game development sounds pretty sweet, I'm not gonna lie. Gina then asked the other developers why they decided to utilize a lime green theme for the Arcanist skills. Brian Wheeler, the lead combat designer, stated that he conducted a study regarding the colors of the other classes. Upon taking screenshots of all of the different class abilities, he stated that it became apparent that there was a color palette that was missing. Joker colors, as he put it. Lime green, purple, and black. Gina then took a question from the chat. The question was, how does crux work on console, specifically? The same way it works on PC? But now, in all seriousness, the developers took a moment to explain how the Arcanist's unique crux mechanic works. And it will indeed work the same no matter what platform you play on. To briefly summarize, as I'm sure many of you are already aware of this mechanic, some Arcanist skills build crux, others spend crux to augment their abilities. It's a fairly basic combo system, but the morphs will add some depth to it. I'm not sure what exactly that gamer meant when they asked their question about how crux works on console, but I'm wondering if they were meaning to ask how they could go about tracking their crux generation, seeing as I'm sure there will be add-ons developed to aid with that, and we all know how console players feel about add-ons, am I right, fellas? I'm just joking, please, why are you unsubscribing? The developers did touch on this notion. They mentioned that they had to implement new tech to be able to have the crux loop around the character. As you build crux, you'll be able to see them spin around your character up to a maximum of 3 crux. Moreover, an ability will start to glow on your bar to show that crux may be spent to augment it. Gina took this next question from the chat as well. What is the Arcanist? She added to this by asking the developers what their philosophy was for the class. The devs shared that from the onset, they knew that the class had to be different from the other classes, not just through its looks and sounds, but how it actually plays. Its main purpose was to provide a different way to play ESO. This is evident through the crux system, although utilizing this system is not mandatory. Wheeler stated that it was imperative that the class would be able to work for all players, that anyone would be able to play the class, but if you'd like to push yourself and truly master it, you can then go ahead and learn how to utilize the crux system. He also suggested that the class toolkit was able to handle all kinds of scenarios. The next question was, how did the devs balance the new class, the Arcanist, with the other existing classes? Steven Seratani, an associate combat designer, stated that there's a standard that's used as a reference when creating skills, such as a standard for single target damage, area of effect damage, heals, debuffs and buffs, etc. For example, Rune Blades is a medium long-range ability that hits one target and deals damage, like Dive from the Warden or Flaming Skull from the Necromancer. The damage and the cost of Rune Blades are very similar to these existing skills, but then additional bits are added to it. For example, Rune Blades do a bit more damage when you have some crux sitting on you. At the same time, there are plenty of abilities that don't fit the existing standards at all that required more work and playtesting to be properly balanced. Fate Carver was cited as an example of this, as the developers had to determine how long the channel should last, how much it should cost per tick, if it should even cost an amount of resources per tick, or if it should have an upfront cost, etc. Standards had to be created to accommodate some of these new skills, like Fate Carver, because they didn't previously exist. Wheeler chimed in to mention that they also had to determine how much a crux should cost. A lot of playtests were conducted by the balance team so that when the class does get introduced, it is tuned appropriately. Gina built upon this notion of internal playtesting by then asking the developers how they handled PTS feedback. Dylan Hairston mentioned that he'd been watching a lot of PTS trial runs, and he noticed that the sound that all of the Arcanists were generating was just too much and far too loud, so they hooked up less intensive sounds, ones with less bass and less intensive bursts upon being cast, to minimize all of the chaos. He also issued a challenge to the players, daring someone to get 100 people or 100 guildies to all beam at the same time in Grotwood. Something tells me that Nephis may just be up for the challenge. Lastly, the devs were asked what they learned from creating the Warden and the Necromancer classes. They stated that they learned to start testing early. It was ideal to split the skill lines into damage, heal support, and tank support, and to make a theme stretch across all of the skill lines, rather than having one specific theme per skill line. This helped the effects team out by not limiting them to certain themes when working on the visuals for the skills. And that about wraps up the stream. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be leaving a link to the entire VOD in the description, should anyone be interested in watching it in its entirety. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the development process of the Arcanist. Let me know if you also appreciate these kinds of stream recaps. I enjoy watching Zoss's more development-heavy presentations, so I wouldn't mind creating brief recaps for those that may have missed them. But that's it for now. Thank you so much to my YouTube members for the extra support, and thank you all for watching this video. See you guys on Discord, in-game, or in the next video. Until then, cheers.